communities. And of course, Mr. Caine, let's pick up where we left off during that first segment and give you an opportunity to say something about historical black colleges and some of the financial situations that many of these institutions find themselves in. And of course, Ms. Terrell will give us some information in reference to the African American communities, and we'll try to tie all of that together during the third segment and come up with some kind of what we might propose as a solution to what we're talking about here. Let's start off from that perspective.
Okay, well, first I want to begin with talking about a group, an organization that has been formed in Nashville. It's called the Save TSU Community Coalition. I'm not the president, by the way. I'm just one of the members. It's composed of faculty and students as well as folks in the community. So what's happening with our historically black colleges all across the country is that our programs are being copied and duplicated by white institutions. And so that's happening at Tennessee State as well. And so the group formed to try to combat this thing. So that's the first point. And the second point is that in 2010, the state of Tennessee came out with a new law called the Complete College Act. And that act, basically, it takes away the ability of a university to offer courses that can be remedial. You know, for kids coming out of high school may need some extra help in areas like English or math. Well, that ability was taken away from the state universities and given to the local community colleges. And so that has contributed to a great brain drain from Tennessee State. So we're trying to deal with this. And so we're organizing ourselves, recognizing that our institutions are long, they have a long history of producing great leaders and professionals like yourself and others. So we want to continue this avenue and stream for our young folks coming along, you know. And so the whole debt relief part comes in because our colleges are challenged, you know, because students bring money to the universities, right? So if you have a drain of students coming to the school, well, then there's going to be a drain in the money. And so as a result, all across the country, these things are happening with our black colleges. And so this is part of our efforts to try to deal with these things in our time.
So what you're saying now is that instead of students going directly to as freshmen into historical black, an institution of higher education, students who find themselves challenged as the overwhelming majority of students a large number of students who generally, like myself, like many of us who first started out at many of these institutions of higher education, find ourselves challenged now instead of now enrolling in a traditional four-year institution like Tennessee State University, those students who might have wanted to go to Tennessee State University can no longer go to a four-year institution, but now will have to go to a junior institution or a community college in preparation to go to the Tennessee State University or some of the other institutions within the system. Is that the gist of what is going on here?
Yes, and also I wanted to add that in the state of Maryland, an historic lawsuit occurred among the 4 black colleges in the state of Maryland because Maryland did the same thing. A lot of their white institutions were draining and copying their programs, their academic programs. And so a lawsuit emerged and those 4 black colleges won. It was Morgan State, Bowie State, and there are 2 others, but they won their case, and so now there are several colleges, black colleges around the country trying to get involved in that lawsuit because the lawsuit, the ruling said that the state of Maryland must return those copied programs back to these universities. And so Tennessee State is potentially going to participate in that lawsuit. So we're pushing for that to happen as well.
And before we get into the communities, Ms. Terrell, let's look again at this idea of copying programs. Exactly what do you mean when you say that institutions are copying programs from the historical black institutions of higher education so that they might use these same programs? Well, how do you define copying programs when you say that?
Well, for instance, TSU has an engineering program, and it's been highly successful. Well, there have been other schools in the city who have tried, not the city, but the surrounding counties, who have duplicated their programs. And so now kids have more options when you look at that. And so the net result is that our student population declines in that area, you know, along with the monies that go along with that and the prestige. And so that's what we mean by copying. Now, Dr. Ray Richardson, I'm sure you know him. He's an expert on the subject. Perhaps you could have him on one of your shows one day to talk about this whole process that's happening with our schools.
Okay, now, Mr. Terrell, let's look at some of the impact over the next couple of minutes, and then we'll start with you on this last segment. Let's look at some of the impact that debt relief and reparations is having on the African American community from your perspective and from your worldwide view in terms of having gone to Africa, and et cetera, all from that perspective.
I would say one of the ways that it impacts us is the programs that are offered in our communities are often cut, and those programs directly impact the family. A lot of times programs that are put into place help mothers and they help children, and when you start cutting programs that provide resources and education and opportunities and experiences for children, then you create a situation where children are not allowed to have exposure or, certain experiences that are only given to children who come from privileged backgrounds. And a lot of times, especially in today's economy, we just can't afford it. Like I said, I'm a wife and I have 5 kids, and my husband is an educator, and educators don't make a lot of money. And so I have dreams and desires for my children to have specific types of experiences, and sometimes in order to fund them, it becomes kind of impossible. And then you have to find yourself working more than one job, and then if you're working more than one job, you're leaving your child unattended, or you're unavailable to transport them to the activities that you are trying to be able to afford for them, and that becomes a problem.
Now we're getting ready for the third segment here, Mr. Terrell. But when we come back, we want to pick up with that, because I think that one of the questions that we have to deal with during this third segment is that we're talking about the allocation of resources. That's essentially what you're talking about. You're not getting enough money from the government or from local situations and et cetera. And so that's what we want to do. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The show for today, we're talking to Mr. Kenneth Caine and Mr. Amelia Terrell about the debt relief and reparations for historical black colleges as well as African American communities. And Mr. Terrell, I think when we left off, we promised that we'd come back during this final segment to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the deprivations in terms of financial resources and resources that ought to be coming to the African community and et cetera. And so let's do it from that perspective and from your point of view.
Well, I thought I did what I was supposed to do to become a part of the middle class. And although I may kind of feel like that's where I'm at, I don't always feel that way. And so I find it, difficult, because at times, when you try to apply for programs, you may make a little too much money to qualify to get the resources, or you don't make just enough to be able to afford it on your own. And so that becomes a problem. And a lot of our children are out there on the streets because they don't have any activities. One of the things that I think about when it comes to my childhood, and when you talk to elders who talk to you about raising your children, they talk about keeping them busy. I was too busy to do anything. I had swim practice, dance practice, church and Sunday school, choir rehearsal, youth group. There was no time for play unless my parents said it was okay. And then it was guided and it was structured. And so today, I'm working 2 jobs, my husband is working a job, and then finding ways to be in the community.
And you're middle class persons, that's what,
We're homeowners, we have pretty good kids, so I consider ourselves to be a part of that class that we thought we were supposed to be in. And it's difficult. Because there are programs that I want my kids in and I can't afford it. And it makes me sad. And then I think about the fact that I have this knowledge and I'm supposed to be a part of this class that can afford it. And then I think about the people who have no knowledge and don't have access to these programs, and how horrible that is. You know, a lot of times these kids, you know, the gangs and the promiscuity, all of that is their way of trying to find something to do with that energy, that creative energy. That creative energy is needing to be guided and properly channeled, and we need mentors, we need programs and opportunities to provide that for our community.
Now, Mr. Caine, I think one time you came to us and you talked about some of the problems dealing with crime in the communities. And so let's look in terms of resources that are available and why so many of our young people become involved in crime and incarceration and et cetera, and et cetera. And I think that one time you gave us some similar kind of information. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Well, first let me say a quote that Dr. King used to always use. He says, "He who gets behind in a race will forever remain behind unless he runs faster than the man in front." So we got started 244 years late in America. While our oppressors were building banks and institutions, we were set free and giving nothing, So we're still trying to deal with that. And so our kids today, in many respects, are confronted with no jobs, okay? Nothing to do, as Jamila mentioned. And so they're just kind of sitting around looking for something to do, but there aren't any options. And so for me, we have to be about the business of trying to make America do what's right. We have to make America see that it's better to go ahead and pay your debt to the former slave ancestors in this country, because if we're going to make it in this country, we have to understand that you cannot do a wrong and act like it never happened and then say to us, lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Well, many of us don't have boots, so we have to try to grapple with this issue. And so it causes all the crime and the gang activity. And then, of course, you end up with a felony in this society. And so once you get a felony, your chance of getting a job is very, very slim. And so what does one do if you are a grown man with aspirations, but you don't have access to the capital in a capitalist society? So again, we have to try to grapple with this thing and not turn our heads away from it, because our kids are suffering as a result. Many of us are suffering as a result.
Mr. Terrell, looking at it from a political point of view, which is to say that if we're going to get more resources into a community, we have to have something that's important in terms of what people who have the resources need, and we've got to vote. And so when you look at it from the perspective of Africans becoming involved in the political process in order to shake the money tree, you see, you can't shake the money tree unless you're involved in the process. And one of the most important processes, I would imagine that the two of you would agree, would be this whole prospect of voting.
Yes.
And I think that one thing that happened when slavery came to an end, we talk about reparations and et cetera. One of the most important things that brought about the gains that they were able to achieve was primarily through their ability to participate in the suffrage.
That's right.
And so we've got,
That's right.
and I think that we're coming up to a situation now dealing with voting, political participation, and et cetera, even in Nashville here, which means that a large number of Africans are not registered to vote. And see, if you're not registered to vote, and if you have been cut off from your suffrage by some activity, criminal activity that you were involved in many, many years ago, then you are left without anything. You see, and so as long as we stand out without being able to participate in the political process, there will be no change in terms of what the two of you are talking about. There are no changes unless you can bring pressure onto the folks who are making rules and regulations at the state legislature. And the two of you have it within your power.
Sure.
But the thing about it is that you have to get out and work with people and get involved in the political process, and especially at a time like now. It's crucial that we see, the last election that we had, only 6%, 6 out of 100 people voted in the metropolitan election.
Wow.
You see, and that's not only black folks. That's six
People.
6 out of 100 folks voted out of the people who are registered to vote, and all you have to do is to come up with some kind of coalition. You talk about a coalition.
Yes, yes.
See, that's the coalition. As long as you stand around and talk about reparations, and let's recall how it was. The only thing you need to recall about the old days about reparations and talk about that is the fact that when Africans came out of slavery, they had the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, and the 15th Amendment, and they were able to use them, and we no longer know how to use the 13th Amendment. It's just that simple. And so as long as you don't get Africans to come out and vote, you can't shake the money tree. You can't make them do what you want them to do in Congress. Mississippi is going to improve that, you see, and it's going to be proved in the upcoming election because, well, we face a time now when black folks are really faced with making a choice. And
Yes, we are.
And the only choice they can make is to what? To vote.
And I think we have to push our politicians to focus on women and children.
Vote. You understand what I'm saying? Which
Yeah.
is say that, yes, they'll do that if they understand that they are supported by the vote.
Yeah.
You see, and if they're not supported by the vote, even on local elections or even on the national level, it really doesn't matter because that's what a large number of money people are paying for when they give money to these politicians. They are paying for what? For votes.
Yes, they are.
They're paying for it in the Senate or on the state legislature. And what we have to do and what you have to do is to understand it from that perspective. Certainly there's debt reparations, there's relief and et cetera, but the only relief that you have is the vote.
Well, if I could just kind of add to what you're saying, we had
Please do, since this is your show.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Go on.
We had Congressman John Conyers come down in April for our conference on debt relief and reparations. And so he is one of the oldest sitting members of Congress today. But a few of our politicians showed up locally.
Well,
So we have, it's not just voting, it's also organizing ourselves.
organizing yourself to vote.
Yes, and so there are many things that we have to do, but we have to begin doing it right away.
Okay,
you know.
very good. And then, of course, we're coming to the end of this show for today, and I want to thank the two of you for coming by and bringing that excellent information. And let me also encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.